Sam had always been a high achiever. From a young age, he excelled in school, impressing teachers and peers alike with his intellect and drive. After graduating from college with a degree in business, he was full of hope and ambition. He had big dreams of starting his own company and becoming a successful entrepreneur. But as the days passed after his graduation, Sam began to feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was about to embark on. The transition from college to the real world wasn't as smooth as Sam had imagined. He had learned many theoretical concepts in his studies, but when it came to practical application, he felt unsure. He was bombarded with advice from friends, family, and even strangers about what he should do next. Some told him to look for a steady job and gain experience before branching out, while others encouraged him to take risks and dive straight into business. The pressure to make the right decision weighed heavily on Sam. He constantly found himself wondering, should I start my own business now, or should I play it safe for a while and get some work experience? What if I fail? What if I make the wrong decision? His mind raced with questions that kept him up at night. But it wasn't just the career decision that troubled him. Sam also found himself wondering about his social life, his relationships, and his personal growth. Everyone around him seemed to have their lives figured out. His friends were already landing jobs, buying homes, and getting married, while Sam felt like he was stuck in limbo. He couldn't help but compare himself to them and felt like he was falling behind in a race he didn't even know he was running. Each day seemed like a new challenge. Should he focus on networking to build his career, or take a break and recharge? Should he spend his time developing a business idea or continue learning new skills? The choices were endless, and yet the more he thought about them, the more paralyzed he became. At the same time, Sam couldn't shake the fear of the future. He knew that his next steps would determine the trajectory of his life, and this knowledge created a sense of urgency that only made his anxiety worse. The thought of failing, wasting time, or making a decision he would regret haunted him constantly. The pressure to succeed, to not waste any opportunity, became so overwhelming that it affected his ability to take action. In this state of constant worry and uncertainty, Sam started to feel disconnected from his true passions and desires. His dreams, which once seemed clear and within reach, now felt like distant, unattainable goals. He became more focused on the fear of failure than the excitement of possibility. The joy he once felt about building his future began to fade into the background, replaced by an overwhelming sense of confusion. It was in this moment of deep internal conflict that Sam decided to seek out advice. Desperate for clarity, he knew that he needed to hear from someone who could help him see through the fog of doubt and fear that had clouded his mind. This expanded version dives deeper into Sam's internal struggles, his feelings of being overwhelmed, and the confusion he faced as he tried to figure out his next steps in life. The pressure of decision-making, comparisons to others, and fear of failure all contributed to his state of uncertainty, which set the stage for him to seek wisdom and guidance from Mr. Johnson. Sure, here's an expanded version of the point seeking advice. Seeking advice expanded. Sam was at a crossroads in his life. Despite all his ambition and drive, he found himself at a standstill, overwhelmed by the enormity of the decisions before him. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on him each day, making it feel as though his dreams were slipping further and further away. He had read books on success, attended seminars, and listened to countless podcasts, all in an attempt to find the answers to his questions. Yet none of these resources provided the clarity he so desperately needed. After weeks of frustration, Sam realized that his attempts to figure everything out on his own weren't working. He needed help. He needed to hear from someone who had walked the path he was trying to navigate, someone who had experienced the highs and lows of life and had gained wisdom from it. He was tired of Googling solutions and seeking advice from peers who were just as uncertain as he was. That's when Sam remembered Mr. Johnson, the elderly man who had lived in the town for decades. Mr. Johnson was known for his deep wisdom, and he had helped countless people over the years by simply offering guidance and perspective. People said that no matter how complicated a situation seemed, Mr. Johnson's advice always cut through the noise and provided a sense of clarity. Though Sam had never personally spoken with him, he had heard about Mr. Johnson's ability to give life-changing counsel. Sam felt a spark of hope as he thought about it. Maybe Mr. Johnson had the answers he was searching for. But a sense of hesitation quickly followed. Was it foolish to seek advice from an older man who had lived in a completely different time? What could someone who had lived through so many years possibly know about the modern world and its challenges? But then Sam pushed those doubts aside. He had tried everything else, and nothing had worked. What did he have to lose? The next day, Sam made his way to Mr. Johnson's house, which was located on the outskirts of town. It was a small, humble house surrounded by a well-kept garden that seemed to mirror the wisdom of its owner, carefully tended, simple yet beautiful. When Sam knocked on the door, Mr. Johnson answered with a warm smile and invited him in without hesitation, as though he had been expecting Sam all along. They sat down in Mr. Johnson's cozy living room, which was filled with shelves of books and comfortable chairs. The room had a timeless feel, as though it held the memories of decades of conversations and reflections. Sam, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation, began to pour out his heart to Mr. Johnson. He explained his confusion, his feelings of being lost, and his fear of making the wrong decision. He spoke of his dreams, but also the constant anxiety that seemed to follow him around, making it difficult to take action. As Sam spoke, Mr. Johnson listened intently, never interrupting, never offering advice. His calm presence made Sam feel as though he had all the time in the world to share his thoughts. And the more he spoke, the lighter he felt. It was as if the act of simply being heard was starting to untangle some of the knots in his mind. Once Sam had finished, there was a long silence. Mr. Johnson sat back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful and kind. It was as if he was reflecting on everything Sam had shared, understanding the depth of his struggle. Sam, for the first time in weeks, felt as though he had finally found someone who truly understood what he was going through. And then, in a quiet voice, Mr. Johnson spoke. He didn't offer the kind of advice Sam had been expecting, the usual follow these steps or do this and you'll succeed advice. Instead, Mr. Johnson's words were simple, but they were powerful. This expanded version of seeking advice delves deeper into Sam's emotional state before deciding to seek out Mr. Johnson. It explores his internal conflict, feelings of desperation, and the doubts he faced about whether an older person like Mr. Johnson could offer any meaningful advice in the modern world. It also sets the stage for the actual meeting with Mr. Johnson, highlighting how Sam opened up and began to feel heard and understood, which was a key step in finding the guidance he needed. Sure, here's an expanded version of the point Mr. Johnson's listening. Mr. Johnson's listening. Expanded, struck by the sense of calm that seemed to permeate the space. The room was quiet, with only the soft rustle of the wind outside occasionally breaking the stillness. Mr. Johnson, an elderly man with a weathered but kind face, led him to a comfortable chair by the window. The scent of old books mixed with a faint aroma of tea in the air, creating an atmosphere of peaceful reflection. There was something about the way Mr. Johnson moved and spoke that made Sam feel as though time itself had slowed down. As Sam began to speak, he found himself surprisingly emotional. He had been carrying his doubts and fears in silence for so long that it felt almost overwhelming to finally voice them. He talked about his struggles, his anxiety over the future, the constant pressure to make the right decisions, and the crushing feeling that he was falling behind in life. His words tumbled out in a rush, as if trying to catch up with the weight that had been building inside him. Mr. Johnson didn't interrupt him. He didn't try to offer solutions or tell Sam what to do right away. Instead, he sat back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Sam's face. His gaze was steady and unhurried, and there was a deep, silent understanding in the way he looked at Sam. It was as though Mr. Johnson had heard these kinds of concerns before, many times over the years, and he knew the power of simply allowing someone to express themselves fully. Sam noticed something unusual about Mr. Johnson's presence. Most people, when listening, would either try to comfort him with quick words of encouragement or jump in with their own opinions. But Mr. Johnson was different. He allowed Sam to speak without judgment, without trying to fix anything. His silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was welcoming, as if he was giving Sam all the space he needed to untangle his thoughts. As Sam spoke about his fears of failure, his doubts about making the right decisions, and his constant comparison to others, he felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he felt heard, not just listened to, but truly understood. There was something incredibly validating about Mr. Johnson's silence. It wasn't that Sam was looking for sympathy or pity. It was that he needed someone who could simply witness his struggles without offering a rushed solution. But Mr. Johnson's listening didn't feel passive. It was active and engaged, yet unhurried. He wasn't in a hurry to finish the conversation or offer the right advice. He was present with Sam in that moment, fully attuned to what Sam was expressing, not just through his words, but through his body language, his tone, and the unspoken emotions behind his concerns. In that stillness, Sam could almost feel Mr. Johnson's years of experience and wisdom as though they had been carefully cultivated over decades of listening to others and observing life's complexities. There were moments when Mr. Johnson's expression softened and his eyes would shift slightly, reflecting a deep empathy. He wasn't just hearing Sam's words, he was absorbing the essence of Sam's anxiety, his inner turmoil, and his desire for guidance. And when Sam finally stopped speaking, exhausted from the emotional release, there was another long silence. It wasn't awkward. It was a moment of shared understanding. In that pause, Sam had a realization. He hadn't expected to feel so relieved simply by talking to someone. He had expected answers, strategies, or solutions. But what he received instead was far more profound: the experience of being heard without judgment, the space to truly express himself without the pressure of needing to fix anything. Mr. Johnson didn't immediately speak after Sam finished. He simply sat there, allowing the silence to continue for a few moments longer, as if giving Sam time to reflect on everything he had just shared. It was during this pause that Sam began to feel a shift within himself. The answers he had been desperately seeking didn't need to come all at once. The process of unloading his worries had already begun to clear the fog in his mind, and then, finally, Mr. Johnson spoke. Not with a rush of advice, but with words that carried the weight of his years of experience. He spoke slowly and thoughtfully, choosing each word with care. It was as though he had waited for just the right moment to offer his insight, and now, with Sam's heart and mind laid bare, he was ready to share the wisdom that would guide him forward. This expanded version of Mr. Johnson's listening dives deeper into the profound impact of Mr. Johnson's listening. It illustrates how his approach to listening was not only about hearing Sam's words, but also about creating a space where Sam felt truly understood and validated. By focusing on Mr. Johnson's patient, empathetic presence, the story emphasizes how the act of listening itself can be transformative, setting the stage for the wisdom and advice that would follow. Sure, here's an expanded version of the point: surprising advice. Surprising advice, expanded advice, expanded advice, expanded advice. Experts advise only in silence. Mr. Johnson leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes never leaving Sam's face. The room, still filled with the weight of the conversation, seemed to hold its breath as Sam waited for the advice he had come seeking. He had poured out his fears, his uncertainties, and the endless questions that had been swirling in his mind. He expected Mr. Johnson to offer the kind of practical advice that people often gave to young adults in his position: step-by-step strategies, a detailed roadmap to follow, or perhaps a carefully crafted plan that would show him the best course of action. But instead, Mr. Johnson's response was unexpected, even baffling at first. He took a slow, deliberate breath and said, "Sam, I'm not going to give you a list of things to do. I'm not going to tell you how to plan every aspect of your life or guarantee success in the way you might expect. What I'm going to tell you is this: stop thinking about your future, focus on the present." Sam blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Focus on the present? Wasn't that exactly what he had been struggling to do? Every waking moment of his life had been consumed by thoughts of what he should do next, what he needed to achieve, and how every decision would affect his future. Wasn't thinking about his future, the whole point. He had expected to hear something concrete, something he could follow, not vague advice about living in the moment. Confused, Sam leaned forward slightly. "I don't understand. You're saying I shouldn't worry about my future at all? How can I succeed if I don't plan for what's ahead? Shouldn't I be making all these decisions about my career, my business, my life? The future is where everything counts." Mr. Johnson smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners with the wisdom of age. "It's not that you shouldn't plan or make decisions, Sam. It's that you can't live your life in constant fear of the unknown. The future is, by nature, uncertain. If you spend all your time worrying about what will happen 5 or 10 years from now, you'll miss out on the opportunities right in front of you. The present moment is all you really have control over. When you focus on today, on what you can do now, you'll build the future you want without even realizing it." Sam felt a wave of doubt rush over him. He had been taught his whole life that success came from meticulous planning, from setting goals, from thinking ahead and anticipating every possible outcome. His professors, mentors, and friends had all emphasized the importance of structuring his future. And yet, Mr. Johnson's words seemed to turn that belief on its head. "But, Mr. Johnson," Sam said, his voice tentative, "if I don't plan for the future, what if I miss the chance to do something important? What if I make the wrong decision now and it ruins everything?" Mr. Johnson's expression softened and he leaned forward slightly, speaking in a calm, almost reassuring tone. "Sam, the truth is that life is not as predictable as we would like it to be. No matter how much we plan, things rarely go exactly as we imagine. What's most important is that you are present here right now. What you do today matters far more than you realize. When you focus on the present moment, when you put your energy into doing something that excites and challenges you, the future will take care of itself. You'll make decisions along the way, but they won't be driven by fear or anxiety. They will come naturally as you stay engaged with your life." Sam sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Focus on today? Was it really that simple? He had spent so much time imagining a future that seemed too far off to even grasp, and yet, here was Mr. Johnson telling him to release that pressure and embrace the present. It felt both freeing and terrifying at the same time. So Randall, could it be true? Could the answer to his struggle really be found in focusing on what he could do now, in this very moment? Mr. Johnson continued, "You see, Sam, the most important thing isn't knowing every step of the journey ahead. It's about starting the journey. If you wait till everything feels perfect, if you keep waiting for the right time, you'll never begin. Life is about taking action in the present and trusting that each step forward will lead you where you need to go." Sam felt a mixture of relief and confusion. On one hand, it was comforting to think that he didn't need to have everything figured out right away. On the other hand, the idea of not planning every move still felt foreign to him. He had always thought that success required careful strategy and forethought. "Don't worry about perfection," Mr. Johnson added with a small laugh. "Don't worry about having the right answers. The future will unfold as it should. Just make the most of today and the rest will follow." It was at that moment that Sam's perspective began to shift. His heart, which had been heavy with the weight of uncertainty, began to feel lighter. The pressure that had been suffocating him started to fade away, replaced by a newfound clarity. Mr. Johnson wasn't giving him a roadmap or a formula for success. He was offering something far more profound, the permission to trust the process of life, to focus on what was in front of him right now, and to allow the future to emerge as it would. Sam left Mr. Johnson's house that day feeling a sense of calm he hadn't known in months. The advice had been unexpected, but it resonated deeply with him. He had come seeking answers, expecting detailed guidance on how to navigate his future, but instead, he had been given something more valuable, a reminder that life wasn't about controlling every detail. It was about embracing the present, taking action where he could, and trusting that the future would unfold in its own time. This expanded version of surprising advice emphasizes how Mr. Johnson's advice challenges Sam's previous beliefs about success, planning, and the future. It illustrates Sam's initial confusion and resistance to the idea of focusing on the present, as well as the gradual realization that life is not always about meticulous planning, but about being engaged in the moment. This advice not only surprises Sam, but also begins to unlock a deeper understanding of how to approach life with a sense of trust and presence. Conclusion. As Sam walked away from Mr. Johnson's home that day, a weight seemed to lift off his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity and peace he hadn't known in months. The constant pressure to make the right decision, to plan every aspect of his future, and to predict every possible outcome all seemed to fade into the background. Mr. Johnson's surprising advice to focus on the present rather than obsess over the future had struck a chord with him. Sam didn't walk away with a detailed roadmap for his career or life, but he had received something far more valuable. The understanding that he didn't need to have everything figured out at once. By concentrating on today, on taking small, meaningful steps toward his goals, and trusting the process, he would naturally move closer to the life he desired. The anxiety that had once paralyzed him began to lose its grip, replaced by a sense of freedom and possibility. The future no longer felt like an overwhelming obstacle, but rather a path unfolding step by step. In the days and weeks that followed, Sam began to embrace his new approach. He stopped obsessing over every choice and began to take action where he could, one day at a time. He found joy in the small tasks and made progress without the pressure of perfection. His confidence grew as he trusted his own instincts, and the process of growth, the more Sam focused on the present moment, the more he realized that life's answers often come when we stop forcing them to appear. Ultimately, Sam learned a valuable lesson. The key to a fulfilling life isn't found in the endless pursuit of certainty or control over the future. It's found in embracing the present, trusting the journey, and taking action with courage, even when the path ahead isn't fully clear. By letting go of the need for perfection and trusting in the process, Sam began to build the future he had once feared was out of his reach. Mr. Johnson's simple but profound advice had left Sam speechless, but it had also changed his life, teaching him that sometimes the best way to move forward is to let go of the need to control everything and simply live in the now.